I read a book recently called Not Even Wrong: The Failure of String Theory and the Search for Unity in Physical Law. So first of all, the general premise of this book is that string theory, which is the leading theory in particle physics, is a failure, according to this book and many other critics as well. And this is a very controversial claim, of course, due to the fact that the vast majority of the leading physicists in the world are working on string theory, are dedicated string theorists, and string theory has been sort of the queen of physics for like 40 plus years at this point. And while the vast majority of us do not have any idea what is even approximating what's going on in the underlying math of string theory, there are some very simple arguments that we can all understand that lend themselves to very valid criticisms against this theory. And they're very simple. Now, according to this, amongst other sources I found online, there's not really an actual theory of string theory. There's a broader category called M theory. There's the study of brains. There's the study of strings. There's all sorts of subtopics within the domain of string theory, but there's no actual theory underlying string theory. It's a set of ideas and concepts and mathematics all working together, working towards something, but there's not actually a theory underlying. And this is problematic, of course, even though it's a very interesting topic to explore. So first of all, why don't we start by trying to understand what we're actually doing when we practice physics? Any kind of physics, not just particle physics necessarily. Now, I actually taught physics for a couple of years at the undergraduate level, so I at least have some idea of what I'm talking about, but I'm nowhere near on the level of like a string theorist, for example. My specialty, I have a degree in mathematics, and I taught physics for a while, so that's just out in the open. That's my sort of background on this sort of thing. So when we do physics, we're trying to create mathematics to describe phenomenon in the universe. It's not necessarily that we're perfectly describing what is happening, but in my opinion, the important thing to understand that a lot of people don't quite get is that when we make physics, we're creating something. It's not like we're discovering like this is the exact formula that is used for a ball that moves in this way. No, it's a creation of numbers and variables that interact in a certain way that correspond with the laws, quote unquote, that govern the universe. Now, you could say that the laws are innate to the universe and those that we discover, but just take like classical Newtonian mechanics, for example. We have the very simple equation where distance is equal to velocity times time plus acceleration times time squared. Now, that equation is true in a perfect universe. There's other forces at play, so it doesn't always calculate perfectly. But that equation and those variables did not exist until we invented them. Numbers don't exist without our hand in doing so, or really anything for that matter. That's concept superficiality for you, by the way, connected to physics. So anytime we're making a model of the universe, we are doing just that. We're creating an imperfect model of the universe. And whether it's even possible for us to make a perfect model of the universe, that's, another question, of a model that would encompass all the forces and all the particles and everything collectively all together. As to whether that's even possible, that's a different question. But ultimately what we're doing is we're trying to write a story using numbers and lots of other more complicated mathematical entities too. The proponents and the practitioners of string theory are working towards, or at the very least they believe they're working towards something that will eventually become a theory. But at this point, our technology does not allow us to actually test any of these things experimentally. So in this way, it's sort of a faith-based science. And Peter Voigt makes this very clear in his book, that ultimately these guys don't actually know whether a theory exists, a theory that describes the universe well and the phenomenon that we see. But they believe that string theory is so sophisticated of an enterprise and there's so much potential for it to go in all sorts of different directions that, their sort of opinion is that once we have the technology that allows us to actually test these things and observe the phenomenon at the scale that we're talking about here, because we're talking smaller than microscopic. This is like Planck length level small is what string theory is trying to describe. So it's who knows whether it'll ever even be possible to test, whether that technology will ever come about. But you can understand their perspective, because if they really believe that string theory is this rich with mathematics and potential to describe phenomenon at this scale, then it makes sense for them to continue pursuit in this direction, even though there's no actual theory that governs it. And the other perspective, the critics, Peter Voigt, Eric Weinstein, others, they point out the obvious problems, which is that this theory does not make predictions, and because this theory is basically the only game in town, we're sort of betting everything on this one theory. Granted that this theory seems to go in all sorts of different directions and is very all-encompassing and is capable of quite a lot. The fact that we're gambling so heavily on this one thing is dangerous, ill-informed, ignorant, a little bit callous. Now you add into this mix a very big problem, which is a problem in pretty much any discipline, and that is that the physics community in America, at least, is a very competitive, ruthless, non-zero-sum game. So you have all these physicists that are all participating in this one endeavor, and you have this one theory that's like the hot shit. Like, that's what you need to be working on if you want to make progress in your career as a physicist. So if people who don't pursue this and don't make those leaps in their career are either losing their jobs or having their salaries lowered or not availing themselves of other opportunities, you're basically creating an artificial selection process where you're selecting only those who participate in this faith-based theory. And whether it's intentional or not, we're really devoting all of our resources to this one theory because of these, invisible economic forces that we don't really have control over. Now, on top of this, we also have the glamour that is string theory. When I was growing up, I always heard about string theory as though it were this magical thing. And the guys doing string theory, those must be the best guys. Like wow, if only I could grow up to be a string theorist, how incredible that would be. There's almost this magic aura sort of surrounding the topic, just because, number one, it sounds really cool. There's a lot of really cool names. It's the pinnacle of the field at the moment. So it's really hard not to look at it as this really top of the food chain, untouchable, infallible thing that you just shouldn't question. And that's not to say that we can't question it, but it is to say that those who inhabit that field probably also have the same sort of perception about their field. And what does that lead to? That leads to ego, of course, and ego is very destructive. What's even more dangerous is ego on a person who's very smart. And who are the smartest people in the world? But the people in the string theory community. So this is a very dangerous sort of mixture we got going on here. And that's not to say that we necessarily know for a fact that there's a huge problem of egocentric geniuses in the pinnacle of our sciences at the moment. But all the ingredients are there very clearly. We have the competitiveness, we have the glamour of being a string theorist, we have the obvious genius that is required to get up there. So it makes sense then when somebody like Peter Voigt comes along and attacks them. Actually, attack is a really strong word, because he's pretty fair in his book. I think he's not very vicious at all. He makes some very, level-headed claims and some, very standard neutral observations and some very balanced, normal conclusions from those observations. But the response he receives from the physics community is vitriolic, to say the least. And, that could be a few isolated voices, but it seems to be a general trend that they respond to him and others who critique them with very personal attacks along the lines of, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, you're not one of us, or blah, 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 blah. But, as I said earlier, the claims that he makes, the critiques he makes, are very simple and easily clarified. You don't need to be an expert in string theory to understand the criticisms, that there's no actual theory underlying the theory, it makes no predictions. And, I started this video giving the benefit of the doubt to the string theorists that maybe it does make sense for them to explore this field if they have really, strong reason to believe that it will have use someday. It seems, you could very easily make that case, but I haven't been able to find any real responses to Peter Voigt that aren't just oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about, he's not one of us, he was blah, blah, blah. So, anytime you have someone that tries to dismiss a person's claims just on the basis of their character, that's always a very severe red flag, in my opinion. If you believe you're correct, you should be able to support your beliefs factually, especially if you're a genius on the caliber of a string theorist. Who, if not them, can we trust to give balanced perspectives and support their claims and defend their claims impartially without making personal attacks? It's very damning, let's say, to see such behavior from such prominent physicists. And this is the kind of behavior that we see from the woke community and the hive mind of people who believe in woke ideology. And will make personal attacks on you if you try to criticize the thing. It's a cult-like mindset, and it seems to be manifesting here in this community as well, which is very alarming. And it definitely is suggestive that they might be a little bit insecure about the foundation of their careers, because, try to put yourself in their perspective. They've worked their whole career, ever since they were an undergraduate. They've been learning about string theory. So, these guys are 45, 50, 60 years old. They've been working on it for up to 40 years maybe, since its inception maybe. It started in the 80s. You have people who've been working on this thing for 40 years of their life. That's more than half of their life. And you want to preserve your ego, and your ego is attached to this thing. So, when an ego is strong enough, it sees the death of itself as the death of the person, and that leads to suicide. So these people are tentatively defending their own lives, or they perceive themselves as doing that. What did Hitler do when his regime crumbled? He committed suicide, because that's what the ego does. He attached his whole identity to his regime, and these people have their entire identities attached to their regime, and that's not to equate them. Okay, I'm not equating the string theory community with the Nazi regime. Important clarification right there. Okay, yeah, so I just wanted to share this idea with you, because I thought it was really interesting, and it's a topic that is very interesting to me. And let me know what you think. That's all.